The black janitor noticed a symptom in the CEO that everyone else ignored. She sat in her leather chair at the head of the boardroom, poised as the center of power, while her executives showered her with admiration. To the room she was untouchable, calm, brilliant, invincible. But the janitor, quietly moving in the background, saw what no one else cared to see. Her breaths were shallow, her posture slightly collapsed, and a trembling hand gripped the armrest as if holding on to strength. The others laughed, pitched ideas, and filled the air with praise, blind to the danger. But he knew, those signs weren't nothing. They were a warning, and soon they would mean everything. Set up, 3-4 minutes to 310 words. Marcus Johnson was invisible to most. Every evening, he arrived at Stratton Global headquarters after the rush of the day ended, dressed in his navy blue maintenance uniform, ready to sweep, mop, and empty bins in the grand corporate tower. He had walked those glossy marble floors for nearly 15 years. But to the employees, he was just the janitor. They passed him daily without learning his name. What they didn't know was that Marcus once had a very different dream. Years earlier, he had studied nursing, determined to build a career in healthcare. He loved science. He loved people, and most of all, he had a gift for noticing details others missed. But when his mother's health collapsed, he abandoned his degree to take care of her, working nights to pay medical bills. His medical career had slipped away, but his sharp eye for human frailty never left him. That's why, when he pushed his cart into the top-floor boardroom one late evening, he noticed something no one else did. The CEO, Eleanor Stratton, one of the most powerful women in the city, was seated at the head of the long, polished oak table. Around her, senior executives leaned in with enthusiasm, presenting slides, pitching expansions, and vying for her approval. She commanded respect, her reputation built on ruthless brilliance. People feared her, envied her, adored her wealth. But to Marcus, she wasn't just a CEO on a pedestal. She was a human being. And tonight, he saw something troubling. Signs she wasn't well. Subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but unmistakable to someone who had once studied medicine. Marcus paused, mop in hand, pretending to fuss with the trash bin. While his eyes lingered on the CEO, he noticed her posture was different. Usually upright, commanding, Eleanor now leaned slightly to her left. Her face carried a tightness, her complexion pale beneath her makeup. Her right hand pressed absently against her chest. And every few minutes, her breathing hitched, not enough to draw the room's attention, but enough to set off alarms in Marcus's mind. He knew these symptoms. He remembered long nights studying cardiovascular distress during his nursing days. Shortness of breath, chest pressure, fatigue hidden behind a forced smile. Individually, they might have seemed harmless, but together, they spelled danger. Yet no one else saw. The executives carried on, their voices filling the air with jargon and profits. To them, the CEO's momentary discomfort was irrelevant, if they even noticed it at all. Wealth and power blinded them, convincing them their leader was invincible. Marcus gripped the mop tighter. Should he say something? He was just the janitor. If he interrupted the meeting to warn them, they would laugh, mock him, maybe even fire him for disrespect. Who was he to question the health of the millionaire CEO in front of her board? And yet he couldn't ignore it. His mother's face flashed before him, how she, too, had dismissed symptoms until it was too late. He had vowed never to stay silent again when he saw danger. Minutes ticked by, the signs worsening. Eleanor adjusted her chair, pressing her hand harder against her ribs. A sheen of sweat glistened at her temples. She reached for her water glass, but her hand trembled so violently it clinked against the rim. Still, the executives rambled on, blind. Marcus's heart pounded. He stepped closer, deliberately slowing his cleaning, placing himself nearer to her chair. He caught her eyes for a brief second, and in that look, he saw something chilling. Fear. It was then he made his choice. Suddenly, the CEO's body stiffened. Her hand clutched at her chest, and her face contorted in pain. She tried to rise from her chair but collapsed back, gasping. Papers scattered, voices rose in panic, and the boardroom erupted in chaos. Executives froze, shouting to one another, but no one acted. They had never imagined their iron-willed leader could falter. And now, in the moment of crisis, they were helpless. Marcus dropped his mop and rushed forward. "Call emergency services!" he barked with a clarity that shocked the room. He moved to Eleanor's side, lowering her carefully in the chair, loosening her collar, and checking her pulse. The board members stared in disbelief as the janitor took command, his calm precision contrasting their panic. He tilted her slightly, monitoring her breathing. Her pulse was rapid, weak. He recognized the signs immediately, a possible cardiac event. "Do you know what you're doing?" one executive stammered. Marcus ignored him. He focused only on Eleanor. Her lips had turned pale, her breath shallow, eyes fluttering. He positioned her safely, keeping her airway clear, speaking to her in a steady tone. "Stay with me, ma'am. Help is on the way." Moments later, her body slackened, her pulse fading. The room gasped. Marcus moved swiftly, lowering her onto the floor and beginning chest compressions. His large hands pressed rhythmically, firmly, exactly as he had been trained years ago. He breathed for her when she stopped breathing, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Come on, ma'am. Breathe." Time slowed. The executives stood frozen against the walls, powerless, watching the janitor fight for their CEO's life. Then, at last, Eleanor gasped. A ragged, desperate breath. Her chest rose again. Color returned faintly to her face. She was alive. Paramedics burst into the room, summoned belatedly by a secretary. They took over swiftly, attaching monitors, preparing transport. But before wheeling her out, one paramedic turned to Marcus and said, "If you hadn't acted when you did, she might not have made it." The boardroom fell into stunned silence. That night changed everything. Eleanor Stratton, the untouchable millionaire CEO, survived her cardiac scare because a janitor, someone her executives rarely acknowledged, saw what they ignored. She would spend weeks in recovery, reflecting on the irony that the man who saved her life was the one most dismissed in her empire. For Marcus, the aftermath was surreal. The board that once overlooked him now regarded him with awe. Newspapers later picked up the story of a janitor turned hero, though Marcus never sought fame. He only said quietly, "I just did what was right." But behind that humility was a deeper truth. Society often measures worth by titles, money, or power. Yet when crisis struck, none of that mattered. The room full of millionaires had frozen. It was the janitor, the man invisible to them, who stepped forward with knowledge, courage, and compassion. Eleanor herself, upon recovery, sought him out. For the first time, she looked him in the eyes, not as a janitor, but as a man who had seen her humanity when others only saw her power. Her gratitude was genuine, and though she could never repay the life debt, she began to change how her company treated those at the bottom. The lesson rippled outward. Never underestimate the overlooked. Sometimes the ones we ignore carry the greatest wisdom. Sometimes the lowest voice in the room is the only one that truly sees. And so, the question remains for all of us. How many lives, how many truths do we miss simply because we choose not to notice the people we think don't matter?